Today I'm going to be talking about the openings and closures of the gates of Janus as the entrance to the Temple of Janus in order to understand Roman attitudes towards war and peace and how they categorised each of them. I've been incredibly interested in the gates of Janus and the Temple of Janus as a whole ever since I found out about them during my first year of ancient history A level. Closed during a time of peace and open during a time of war. I thought it was so interesting and even moving in some respects how the openings and closures of just some doors could have ramifications on the mood and state of an entire kingdom, republic, or empire. I say kingdom, republic, or empire here, as the Temple of Janus has origins way back to the founding of Rome, with the king who succeeded Romulus beginning what would later become the Temple of Janus. It is difficult to establish a timeline from when the gates were first used symbolically, most likely during the time of the second king, but what it is hard to discover is why they started to be used this way. But personally, I believe that this makes the gates more interesting and even abiding, as we see a tradition that has such a solid foundation and hold on the Roman public have no definite start, just that this is something that's been a part of Rome's identity since its toddler years. I always wondered, what were they classifying as peace and war for there to be an opening or a closure in the first place? Especially during the empire, Rome was all about expanding the empire, and expanding meant conflict. And so, since that is when the closures of the doors have happened the most frequently, I was quite surprised at that, because I thought that in any case it'd be more during the republic or a kingdom when it'd be at peace, but no, it was the empire. And so I was wondering that whether did all peace mean did peace mean all types of conflict was off the table? Were they able to wage war or extend their empire through conflict when the doors were closed, as long as no war was being waged against them? I understand the gates of Janus to be a symbolic, nuanced way of visualizing war and peace through the perspective of both a Roman and someone today, and therefore feel like we get a great amount out of the gates of Janus in understanding ancient practices and attitudes towards war and peace. Okay, so I want to discuss how we are able to determine today what is a state of war and what is a state of peace, and how we are able to use the state of the gates of Janus through biographers like Suetonius and Plutarch to understand how that differs today. So peace building and the gates of Janus are two interesting things to compare, as one would think that since the gates of Janus signal whether Rome is at war or peace, peace building and closing the doors would go hand in hand, where this is not always the case. The closure of the gates does not necessarily mean that a true bottom-up peace has been achieved and built on for years, but instead that there is an absence of an ongoing conflict, almost certainly violent, and therefore peace can be assumed. This attitude is still rife today, especially still looking at contemporary events. Just this week and the week past, just by looking on the news and online, I've seen suggestions by the news and other people that the pause in fighting in Gaza, for example, is a peace, a rocky one, but it's still a peace when it is instead a momentary relief for aid to come in, when that exact same conflict will pick straight back up after the temporary ceasefire is over instead of a peace being achieved? Would the gates of Janus be closed for something like this, for example? The answer is almost certainly no. Rome's days with the gates are barely a blip in its history, but their senates were incredibly selective when it came to picking what was a true peace to them. So this is where it comes to this coin. This is probably one of my favourite coins, probably second to Caesar's Pontifex Maximus coin. And I think it's a great way to display the nuanced attitudes towards war and peace in the Roman Empire. The importance of the gates of Janus can be realised here through the coinage. As minted in 67 AD, the coin celebrates Nero's closure of the gates the year before in 66. The coin was minted as a celebration with garlands just above the door and on the right-hand side to celebrate, and displaying that even in a state where militarism was practically a part of the Roman identity, and even a way of becoming a part of the Roman identity, as if you weren't Roman, but you joined the army for a certain amount of time, then you gained Roman citizenship. So you gained it through the military. So, and Suetonius claims here that when Nero closed the gates of Janus, it meant that there was no war left anywhere. This prerequisite for closing the gates is an important one that leads on to my next question of what is peace to Romans, and how does a state of peace differ from their state of war? So in a journal article in Acta Classica, the scholar Farron reinforced Suetonius's idea that there must be universal peace in order for the gates to be closed. Universal peace here is subjective, with contemporaries to the gates understanding that it meant no war in the empire. But it is again interesting that Suetonius said that no war must be anywhere for the gates to be closed in peace, as it would have obviously been impossible for Nero's Rome or empire to have had that kind of grasp of understanding of conflict around the entire world. Augustus picks up here in his Res Gestae on the screen and boasts that his reign contained more closures, 3, than the entire history of Rome had right up until its founding, which was 2. I think here we see myth, which I think is very important. So Virgil, I think for the bottom point, suggests that the gates aren't only symbolic, but instead they imprison war with inside the temple, whereas writers like Horace believe that they keep peace inside, which I think is interesting, as it almost suggests that no matter what kind of state Rome was at, whether the gates are open or closed, it always feels like it's just a pause waiting for war to happen again. It doesn't feel like a genuine end to conflict or peace, but instead that it's just been imprisoned for a later date. And so I just wanted to talk about the future of the gates of Janus and symbolically what we can do or others to use it and get the most out of it in understanding war and peace. But symbolically, I believe that if we were able to combine this piece of history with modern understandings of war or peace, the Gates of Janus is a great and valuable source in understanding just how often conflict is a part of our lives, whether we see it in front of our eyes in person, or videos of bombings or machinery filling in mass graves on our Twitter feed. This is something I was considering designing or looking into for my future pathways essay. But I think that researching into the history of a specific country, their conflicts, wars, and resolutions, and times of peace, and creating a timeline where the gates of Janus can be applied to each of these things and is next to each period and labelled as either open or closed, is a visual, valuable aid to understanding just how much time a country spends at war. If this were to become a wider project, for example, something that many people would do for different countries, the extensive research would allow the timelines to be placed atop of one another and overlap, therefore meaning that we would be able to see whether there are actually any points in history where the universal peace that Farad and Suetonius believed had to be achieved was ever actually achieved. The creation of the timeline would not only be informative, but it would be symbolic, with the gates of Janus being used just as the Romans did. So thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry about the croaky voice. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll see you in the Q&A on Friday.